find me, Mommy?" She heard her son's voice and let herself feel joy for a moment, before, even in her dream, the reality of what had happened came crashing down on her. She was crying as she wandered through the dark and empty house. All the while, his words still echoed from the walls around her. Find me. It was his favorite game. Hide and seek, with him hiding and her looking around for him. Julie stopped in the middle of the dark and hardly recognizable living room of their house. She couldn't do it anymore. Shouldn't as well. Though this was only a dream, something told her that even in here, she would never get a happy ending. Because Leo was gone. And so was her husband. Julie opened her eyes and could feel the tears staining the carpet below her. She wasn't in bed, she realized, then closed her eyelids to concentrate on how she had ended up here, on the floor, again. It was still dark out, so she must have been either sleepwalking or had woken up some time ago, stumbled out of bed and come here to calm down. Did it even matter how she got here? Julie let her hands wander over the soft carpet until she found the wet spot where her tears had fallen. She didn't care at all. He was gone. They were gone. Husband and son, and with them, all the light had left her life. She turned her body until she was lying on her back and opened her eyes again. Up on the ceiling, she could see the stars. A whole bunch of those glow-in-the-dark stickers her husband and her had put up to help Leo with bad dreams after the nightlight had stopped doing its job. At first, she had thought it would never work, that her son wouldn't calm down if they made his room look like the outside during the night. But to her surprise, Leo had absolutely loved it. Had told her again and again and again. A slight smile came over her lips, followed by more tears. She had promised him a camping trip where he could look at the real stars. But that was something that had died with him as well. When the drunk woman crashed her car into her husband's and killed everything that made Julie's life worth living in one single instant. Her groan turned into a wailing sound as she lay there, with new tears streaming down her face. What was she living for right now? The question wasn't her own. It had come from her therapist. He had asked her that over and over again. Not to bother her, but to make herself reflect. At least, that was his explanation. She hadn't taken it that way at all. The question was hell. At first, she had told herself to keep going for their memories, but that was nothing but an empty excuse. They weren't here anymore. No one was here anymore. Only herself. Julie shook her head defiantly and heard the wailing coming from her throat stop. Next, she told herself to go on, to make sure the drunk woman got what she deserved. They only met once, in the courtroom. Julie had finally understood what murderous rage felt like. The woman had looked at her with this sad expression, And thankfully, her sister-in-law had held on to her and had stopped her from vaulting over the railing to try and strangle her to death. But even that hate had since disappeared. The damned woman had taken care of it on her own. Julie still remembered her sister-in-law's voice, as she had told her over the phone, and a sudden empty feeling in her chest. Her dying hadn't given Julie even a smidge of relief. Not because she didn't still blame her, but because her death changed nothing. Leo would never sleep in his room again. Her husband would never come home. It didn't matter how the one at fault lived or died. Her family was gone. Julie stared up into the darkness at the ceiling and could see that the stars weren't glowing anymore. Just like her, dark and empty. She closed her eyes again and let out another soft cry. This room here was torturing her. Lying on the floor where Leo used to play, staring up at the stars that were now dark. It wasn't healthy. She knew. Her therapist had told her that more than once. But not being in here was even harder. In here, she felt like she could hold on to him just a little bit longer. It was as if she could almost touch him again, as if his laughter was just a bit out of earshot. As if something of him was still lingering in here. A tiny part. Julie rolled over to her side and inhaled the stale air of the room. She didn't want to go back to her own bed. In here, in Leo's old room, she felt at least a tiny bit alive again. Tears were streaming down her cheeks, where she sobbed and slowly drifted off to sleep. Julie awoke with her son's voice fresh in her mind again. The sun was shining into the room while she slowly opened her eyes, fighting to keep the dream alive a few moments longer. He was still here with her, as long as she didn't wake up. Someone moved on the floor below, and Julie jumped up in an instant. Dan was back, her mind told her. She needed to greet him. Julie reached the open door, and as she touched the frame, reality came crashing down. No, Dan was dead as well. She could feel all the energy she had dissipating in that instant, while the person downstairs was still walking around. Julie tried to wipe her face, even though she knew her eyes would look puffy, her hair was a mess, and the drool probably stained her chin. She couldn't muster the strength to make herself look presentable. Whatever that meant in her current state. Julie? Are you there? A voice rang out from downstairs, and for a moment she played with the idea of simply staying silent and lying down in Leo's room again. She didn't want visitors, had never asked for them, but her sister-in-law just wouldn't stop coming here. Every day she came by. Sometimes she brought food, other times some old movies or other stuff to keep her occupied. Julie knew that Miriam only wanted to help her, that she did her best, while also mourning the loss of her brother and nephew. But her coming here was still hurtful. Be right down, she croaked while holding onto the doorframe. Her throat felt rough and dry. The skin of her hands looked awfully pale and sickly, and as she took another step, Julie felt a sharp pain shooting up her back and into her neck. She staggered out and into the small bathroom while she could hear Miriam still walking around downstairs. It wasn't like her sister-in-law would find anything there. A few weeks back, in a fit of clarity, Julie had dumped all the alcohol and hadn't had a drop since. It had been a blessing in disguise. Even completely wasted, she hadn't managed to totally forget what had happened to her. But her hangovers had made her situation much worse. Now, she wanted to grieve sober and alone. It was the least she could do for the memory of her son. Turning on the tap, Julie washed her face and rubbed her eyes. When was the last time she had showered or taken a bath? Days ago. Maybe a week? Keeping herself together was hard enough on its own. Caring about her appearance would just be a wasted effort. Julie slowly shook her head without raising it. She didn't want to look into the mirror, was afraid of what she might see in there. "I brought you soup," her sister-in-law's voice echoed through the house, but Julie couldn't even pretend to care. She would dump it down the drain as soon as Miriam left anyway. With her face still wet, she turned away from the sink and let her back touch the mirror for a few seconds to catch her breath. It was time to face Miriam, she told herself, while repeating in her mind that her sister-in-law only had the best intentions. She wasn't at fault, and snapping at her would be useless. With a groan and another shot of pain, she pushed herself off the sink and started walking out into the hallway before turning and heading down the stairs. Every single step felt exhausting, and every move she made hurt. She wanted to lie down again, sleep and dream. Maybe one of these days she wouldn't need to wake up at all. Jesus, Jolie. A voice cut through her thoughts, and as she looked up, she could see Miriam standing there, staring at her wide-eyed. The shock and horror were clearly visible. Did she look that bad? Julie tried to smile, but could feel her lips quivering. "Julie, you need to eat and sleep. You almost look like a ghost." If only, she thought, but kept her mouth shut. There was honest concern in her sister-in-law's voice. She tried to shake her head, but a hand grabbed her by the wrist and pulled her down the last step, before leading her through the house that now seemed so alien, so empty. Miriam brought her to a table and made her sit down. She wanted to protest, to say something about not being a child, but whenever she looked up and saw the other woman's concern, her throat seemed to close up. One after another, her sister-in-law brought her the soup, a spoon, and even a paper towel, before sitting down across from her to watch her eat. Julie still couldn't get out a single word. Again, some part of her wanted to protest, to tell Miriam off, but it all seemed like a pointless effort. She could feel tears welling up in her eyes, and averted her gaze, as suddenly something else stuck out to her. A small piece of paper in the middle of the table. The white seemed to be shining against the dark brown of the polished wood, and Julie felt her heart suddenly racing out of control. She knew this note. Not this one specifically, but ones like it. Leo had always left them for her. Julie tried to reach for it, but a hand stopped her. "First, eat. Then we're gonna talk about that. Okay?" Her head shot around so that she could stare at the other woman. Yet again she relented as soon as their eyes met. Julie felt too exhausted to start an argument. She looked down and slowly began to eat her soup, while her sister-in-law watched her closely. Her mind kept coming back to it, but she forced herself to swallow spoonful after spoonful. Had Miriam found the box with all the notes? That was impossible. She had collected each and every scrap of paper he had ever left her in a small shoebox that was in his old room. The first few days after the accident, when she had completely lost control, she had almost taken the house apart to look for stuff he had left her, and those notes were now her most prized possession. Miriam couldn't have taken one without her noticing, which meant she had missed one. Julie could feel a tear falling into her food, yet kept eating anyway. She couldn't taste a thing, and was now completely focused on the only object that held any meaning anymore. The one in the middle of the table. She finished the bowl, pushed it away from her and toward Miriam, and as soon as her sister-in-law lowered her gaze, Julie's hand shot out and grabbed hold of the note. It must have looked completely insane, but she didn't care anymore. Between her trembling fingers, she turned the piece of paper and felt her heart skipping a beat as she saw the handwriting. In unsteady, childish letters, 3 words had been scrawled on the scrap. "Find me, Mummy." She recognized her son's writing in an instant. This wasn't a fake created by Miriam. No, it was a real note he had written her. She pressed it against her heart and started sobbing again, while her sister-in-law stood up and walked over to her. "Where did you find it?" Julie managed to ask between sobs. Her sister-in-law's hand stopped short. "What do you mean? It was on this table when I got here. I was afraid you had some sort of mental break, Julie." She forced herself to look up at the woman and could see the honest concern in her eyes. Her sister-in-law was telling the truth. Julie reluctantly pulled the note away from her chest and looked at it once more. She thought she had remembered each and every message her son had left for her, but this one was kinda different. The scrap of paper seemed odd, torn off at an angle, but the handwriting definitely was his. Was it a new one? Her heart fluttered, and the soup in her stomach now seemed to coalesce into a giant hot ball. I don't think I have, but thanks for telling me, Miri. And for the soup. I'm feeling much better already. Her voice sounded hollow in her own mind, but it wasn't a total lie. She did feel better already, like her life finally had purpose again. As soon as her sister-in-law left, she would walk through the house once and look for other notes she might have missed. Right now, she felt more than strong enough to do so, which was a definite change from just a few minutes ago. Every single scrap she could find would soothe this pain, even if it was only for a bit. Thanks for dropping by. I'm gonna take a bath now, then sleep in a real bed, if that's okay. Julie mumbled while still staring at the piece of paper in her hands. She knew that Miriam knew it was a lie, but right now she didn't want to concentrate on anything else. There still were parts of him left in this house. She needed to find them. Her sister-in-law mumbled something about coming again tomorrow and having a real talk, but Julie simply waved her off. Some part of her forced her to keep sitting, to not show Miriam how agitated she truly felt. It wouldn't help her case if her sister-in-law thought she was a completely manic wreck. A hand stroked her cheek as the woman walked past her and toward the front door. Julie didn't even lift or turn her head. She could feel her own heartbeat in her throat and listened for the sounds of the entrance closing again. It felt like an eternity before she heard the other woman shouting goodbye, then the door opening and finally falling shut. Julie felt a rush of excitement. She hadn't experienced something like that since the accident. A reason why she had to move. A purpose. Not wasting another second, she shot up from her seat and let the chair tumble backward. Where should she start? The answer was simple. In the basement. Sometimes Leo had hidden down there, between the old cardboard boxes. She rounded the table, the note still firmly in her hand, as she started to run through the house. Her legs felt rubbery, and her lungs were already burning. But Julie didn't mind that at all. In fact, she even enjoyed it. Feeling a pain that wasn't coming from inside was so much easier to tolerate. She reached the door to the basement and could see a small notch in the frame, one Leo had made inadvertently a year ago when he had tried to help his dad, and she stopped to touch it for a moment. She still remembered how annoyed she had felt back then, which now seemed so dumb, so petty in hindsight. Julie let her fingers trace the slight notch and smiled bitterly before finally pulling herself out of her thoughts and opening the door. A cold breeze touched her face as it rushed by. She turned on the light and descended the rickety stairs. Under normal circumstances, she wouldn't have bothered going down there again. The basement was full of stuff that reminded her of her husband and child, but in a very painful way. Leo's first skis. Dan's winter coat he had worn when they had rented a cabin for Christmas. An old sleigh they had bought at a flea market and her husband had restored. Heaps of clothing for every imaginable weather. But today, all those painful memories got pushed back. There were notes to find. Personal small snippets of paper with Leo's handwriting on them. Her heart fluttered as she jumped down the last few steps. She could feel it here now as well. His presence. Julie carefully put the scrap she already had into her back pocket and ran to the basement's farthest corner. She would look everywhere, check every single inch of this place. Something was here waiting for her. She just knew it. Julie reached an old pile of boxes, started lifting down the ones on top. Winter jackets, far too small for Leo to wear. Gloves and shoes from years back. Her heart nearly broke at every single piece she pulled out and turned around. Julie caught herself thinking about him in the presence again. This won't fit him anymore. I can show him how much he's grown already. Maybe he remembers this hat. Tears were running down her face, and she forced herself to stop for a moment. He's gone, Julie, she told herself, dropped a small shard onto the floor, and then suddenly froze. Down there, at the bottom of the box, she could see a white piece of paper. Not crumbled up, definitely not stuck in there when they had put all the clothing that didn't fit him anymore together. With shaking fingers, Julie pulled out the note and read the same 3 words again. "Find me, Mommy." It was torn in the same way as the last one, which Julie now pulled out of her pocket. They looked almost identical, and what made alarm bells ring in her mind, neither of them showed even a speck of dust, as if they had been written just a few minutes ago. She pressed the 2 notes against her chest and felt her heart beating as this feeling of love and longing washed over her. This was it, she told herself, what she had been missing all this time. He was here with her son, Leo. Julie wiped away the tears and felt a smile on her lips. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she was smiling honestly and felt the cold dread falling off. Like a drowning person finally coming up for air, or someone lost in darkness, seeing their first speck of light. The tears stopped, and she remained in that position for as long as that relief washed over her. Minutes, maybe half an hour went by. She didn't know and didn't care. Time was meaningless anyway. Day or night, it didn't matter. Those bad feelings, bad thoughts never left her alone. But now, she finally felt a bit more at peace. That was until she read the notes again. What if there were more of them around here? The thought appeared suddenly, and Julie could feel a heartbeat picking up in response. "Yes," she mumbled, put both the scraps of paper into her back pocket, then picked up the next box. He might have left more messages for her, to ease her pain, right? She pulled another container from the pile, opened it, and started dumping out its contents. Christmas lights, some spare light bulbs, but no scrap of paper. Julie felt annoyed and kicked the box away before turning toward the next one. She worked harder than she had at anything in her life, frantically pulled the boxes apart while no longer caring about the memories those contents elicited. There had to be something else, something more. Box after box got opened and overturned before she started rummaging around old clothing and stashed away toys on the floor. Julie found one more note. "Find me, Mommy." She put it in the pocket with the other 2. This was it, she told herself. A way to find him again. Those notes, they called out to her. With a bitter smile on her lips, she started working again. Hour after hour passed, yet Julie didn't stop. She couldn't. It was driving her on. Every time she found another note, her heart skipped a beat. She felt closer and closer to him. The tears on her cheeks had long since dried, and the smile on her lips had turned into a manic grin while she tore through box after box. Julie couldn't concentrate on anything else anymore. Her fingers were cut and bleeding, and her back was a single sea of white-hot pain. But she couldn't stop herself. Even though she could see the bloodstains she now left on the cardboard and old fabrics, and felt the pain through her whole body every time she moved one of the heavier containers, it was all worth it. There was no time to think of anything but opening the next box. No time to reminiscence, to drown in her sorrows again. He was here with her, Leo, waiting somewhere. She just had to follow the notes, then she would find him. This single thought drove her on. If only she found all of them, she would be able to see him again. Be with him again. Find me, Mommy. She read another note and put it into her back pocket. They were real. He was calling out to her. Julie pushed over a pair of skis, saw them tumbling, then falling, and tried to raise her hands, but was too late. A hard and sharp edge hit her forehead, just above her eye, and she howled in shock and pain as she stumbled backwards. Blood was trickling down her face and onto the mess she had made beneath her feet. For a moment, she stopped and looked around. The whole floor was covered in stuff and empty, torn-up boxes. It looked like a tornado had blown through. Blood was running into her eye, and Julie took another step back before kicking out at the skis that had cut her. Shit. She was bleeding rather badly. Her head was swimming from the pain, and she tasted and smelled this metallic stench now seeping into her nostrils. This was insane, her own voice whispered in her mind. She was going mad. Julie could feel it as well. Her own manic grin drew up her lips, the racing heartbeat hurting her chest, and sweat already covering every inch of her skin. This is bad, she repeated out loud, and heard the strained tone of her own voice echoing around her. She needed a break. It was the first clear thought she had managed to hold on to in hours. One glance at the windows told her that the sun had set already, that the day was over, and some parts of her fraying mind still warned her that she needed a break. To take care of the cut above her eye, at least. Julie reached up and put her hand against the wound. Warm liquid trickled through her fingers and fell onto her shirt and the far too small boots right beneath her feet. She was getting blood onto her son's memories, she told herself, and suddenly felt a chill. No, she couldn't do that. What if he needed it again? Julie whipped around and started running toward the stairs. What had she done? What was she doing? Everything seemed hazy and strange. She could feel the cold chill in her back, but ignored it as she jumped up the stairs. Drops of blood fell onto the wooden steps. It felt wrong, somehow, leaving this place. A part of her wanted to stay, to go back, promised her that she had been so close. Just a bit more and she would have embraced him again. And this thought broke her heart. But Julie kept on running, didn't dare turn around until she had reached the first floor again and thrown the door shut in her back. The cut above her eye was hurting more and more. She could still feel the blood trickling down from it, and some of the drops even ran into her eye. If she didn't take care of it and let it bleed everywhere, Miriam might have her committed tomorrow, she thought with a frown. Now pressing her whole palm against the wound, she slowly moved through the house. Bandages should be in the bathroom, Julie told herself, and only now realized that she hadn't even turned on the lights in here. Well, it didn't really matter after all. She could find a way around the dark house without a problem. Her feet reached the threshold to the living room, and suddenly, she froze up. There, by the table, in the darkest shadows, she could see a figure standing. She would have probably missed it if it wasn't for the note in its hand. Julie lowered her arms and could see the figure staring at her. Leo, she whispered, and watched as the apparition let go of the piece of paper, which slowly fell down onto the table. It burst like a cloud of smoke, and Julie heard soft footsteps racing toward her, then past her as childlike laughter filled the air. Wait! She screamed and whirled around, just as the door to the basement got ripped open and a shadow slipped down the stairs. This was it! He was here! Not thinking about anything else anymore, she ran after the figure, into the light, jumped down the stairs, stumbled and fell down the steps. Time after time she crashed into the wall and railing as she rolled over and screamed for her son. With a thud, she crashed to the floor and was up the next moment. Blood was shooting from the wound on her head and her fingers were bleeding as well. But Julie didn't even notice. "Leo?" she asked, now painfully slurring her voice. A child was laughing somewhere in the back of the basement, out of sight. Julie stumbled forward. Her left knee felt swollen and painful. It didn't matter. Nothing mattered. The childlike laughter continued to fill the whole floor. I'm coming, Leo," she groaned as she stumbled on, slipped on the contents of the turned over boxes on the floor, and crashed to the ground again. "I'll find you." The light above her flickered, and Julie felt the temperature falling around her. He was so close now. She could touch him, embrace him, tell him how much she missed him. All she needed to do was find him and reach out. The child's laughter stopped as the light bulbs throughout the basement burned out in a last bright flash. Julie didn't care. On hands and knees she crawled forward, over the strewn about clothing and toys. He would be here, she promised herself. It was dark, so dark, but she could still feel him. Back there, where she had found the first note, he would be waiting. Her heart was beating out of control, and blood, sweat, and tears were running down her face. He was right there. Julie rounded the last corner and felt something hard and sharp cutting into the palm of her hand. It didn't matter. She had to find him. Looking up in complete darkness, Julie felt eyes meeting hers, and for the first time, her confidence was wavering. "Leo?" she whispered, and felt a gaze burrowing into her. This figure was big, much taller than her. The gaze she felt came from above, from close to the ceiling. It was far too big to be her son. She couldn't see it, but felt it. Its presence. Something touched her face, and Julie shivered. This hand was big and cold and rough. "Find me, Mummy," it cackled, as Julie screamed and the giant thing pulled her into the darkness.